All right.
Now Hello is signing off.
What's that?
Hello is signing off. He just said bye. Or she.
Oh, okay.
She or he.
All right. Well,
but we got Kaylee. Yes.
All right. Well, see you. Goodbye. All right. So I'll keep an eye on that. So ask me that question again, Dr. Armstrong.
I wanted to know if you've ever been to Madrid. I know how to parlez-vous the Espanol, but I don't have any experience in Spain at all. Have you been to Madrid? Have you been to the Prado live?
I went to the Prado just to see Hieronymus Bosch.
Oh my gosh!
And the Garden of Earthly Delights, in addition to the piece that you're going to be talking about. Stacy and I were in Paris, and we had a little bit of an opportunity as we were flying home. It's really easy. Once you're in Europe, it's a lot cheaper to just kind of bounce back and forth from one place to the next. And my problem was I always was under this this constant stress of never being able to see this thing in its entirety.
Yes.
And so being able to just stand there, and it was so popular that we stood. So we flew into Madrid. The only two things we had on the agenda was get breakfast, well, then go and see the Garden of Earthly Delights, then go home. I mean, that was that we went just to see this. We did stay up till 3 a.m. because at 3 a.m. that's when the flamenco was going to get started. I've been a lot of places, and a lot of places that are fun, but there have been very few places as enthralling as Spain. I mean, Spain is just an absolute gem, and the food and the nightlife, it all gets started after 10.
Yeah.
If you're here in Irvine, the least sexy city in the world,
the safest city in the world.
There's not a lot going on after 10. So when you find a place that's got some stuff going on, it's pretty solid. But the way that I was able to look at this, and I'll come back when I get to my piece, is just started on the left and slowly moved every few minutes to the right, just a few steps, and then people did. So it was just kind of this slow move across left to right, which is the way to see it.
Yeah, the journey through the triptych. Yeah,
so
beautiful.
But I got to tell you, but I would also say that I actually don't recommend this museum. I will say, when I say this, I don't mean this for any other reason than that almost every room was a semi-topless Virgin Mary with a suckling baby Jesus or a bloody Jesus. So by the time you got to the room where the Bosch stuff was, you were really primed to see something different from this religious art. And yet it was also seen as religious art. And I'll explain that in a little bit, but your piece really sets us up nicely, because to get anything different, to get anything of the creativity that Bosch presents, has to come through the context of this religious community. It has to have a religious theme. It has to have a moral theme. Otherwise, some of the stuff looks like the most decadent nonsense that they would have slapped Tipper Gore would have slapped a label on in the 1980s.
Yeah, parental advisory on this stuff. Right.
So because of its Christian, coding, it is able to not only be acceptable to very devout Catholic audiences, but in fact, Spanish piety is drawn to collecting this stuff as devotional art, and that's why I think we find it at the Prado. So, but let me turn it over to you. Why don't you get us set up? This is great.
All right. I've never been there, but I know that this tabletop that I'm going to share with you, it's called the Tabletop of the 7 Deadly Sins and the 4 Last Things. It's in the same room that the Garden of Earthly Delights is, that Dr. Mounts is going to share with us later. But there is an awful lot of just masterpiece at the Prado yet to be seen. One of my favorite pieces, Las Hilanderas by Diego Velázquez, is there along with all of Velázquez's paintings, these masterpieces. And it's an extraordinary tour de force of European art collection from the 12th century to the modern day. If you ever get to Madrid, I demand that you send me a postcard. All right, just make certain that we talk, and I will look forward the first time I ever get to go to Spain to doing this. But we're going to share art today. This is your virtual museum excursion. And so thank you for joining us in this. We're only going to look at a couple of pieces of art today, like Dr. Mallinson did with his family, and just kind of trace through it. The one thing you're going to do is look at this piece of art, get breakfast, and enjoy some flamenco and tapas. So also, we're going to look at two pieces of art today. And the first bit that I'm going to share with you for a few minutes is called The Tabletop of the Seven Deadly Sins and the Four Last Things, by a man named Hieronymus Bosch, a Dutch painter, a Flemish artist who died in 1516. We just celebrated the 500th anniversary of his death. We commemorated it. And the Prado had a big exhibition on this. So what I'm going to do is share the screen on this one and hope that you can see this. I think I can still see all y'all, but this is a tabletop. You got to imagine this not hanging on a wall. Imagine it with four legs underneath, and imagine it in the one of the salons of Philip II, the King of Spain, in the middle of the 16th century, after Hieronymus Bosch had died. This is the top of a table that was acquired by Philip II of Spain. And it was transferred to the Monasterio de El Escorial in 1574, a collection of where Hieronymus Bosch's paintings, many of them ended up. The tabletop is oil on wood. It's actually poplar wood. He painted a lot on oak, but this is poplar because it was a little easier to transport if you're going to lift up a piece of furniture and take it around. It was probably painted somewhere between 1500 and 1525, and so just about 500 years ago. You think about the time of the Western Reformation. You know, the Northern Europe is going through a lot of changes at that time. It's painted by Bosch. It measures about 4 feet by 5 feet, 4 feet from top to bottom, 5 feet across. So you can get some dimensions on that. What you see here is a depiction of the 7 deadly sins that radiate out from the center of this painting, narrating vignettes from everyday life in a wheel around the center of the painting. The center circle depicts the resurrected Christ on a field of deep blue, and that's surrounded by an ochre ring from which the rays of his resurrected glory radiate out like spokes toward the wheel of the vignettes. You see this? And you see that it's the resurrected Christ with the wounds in his hands. This is Christ in his passion, the one who has died for the sins of the world. He's right at the dead center of this tabletop. And taken whole, the centerpiece of the tabletop resembles nothing so much as an eye. E-Y-E, like the organ of sight, the eye. The iris of which is taken up with the colorful scenes of everyday life, and the pupil of which reflects the resurrected Christ. The interpretation of this painting is reinforced by the inscription that's immediately below this Christ image. It says Cave, Cave, and then it says DNS with a abbreviation symbol over it, which is Latin Dominus. Cave, Cave, Dominus videt, which means watch out, the Lord is watching. Beware, beware, the Lord sees what you're doing. All right? So while the vignettes that are underneath illustrate the sins around the entire circle from all the angles of the tabletop, we also have these tondi. If you can see my cursor, I don't know if you're able to see those arrows. Are you? That's great. We've got these 4 corner representations too of the last thing. So we've got 7 deadly sins around it. And then we've got these tondi, these little circles in the corners that are representations of death and judgment and resurrection, and then heaven And then the most interesting one down here in the bottom left, which is hell. All right. So these show the sins that are going on around the circle of that eye. In hell, they're condemned in a contrapasso fashion. This is a fancy Italian word, and I'm just going to write it here in the chat bar: contrapasso, and it's contrapasso, I think, with an A. And since Angelique is there, I'm going to ask her to translate for us, because not because her name is Angelique Antonini and I think that she knows Italian, but because I know she's an expert in art history. What does contrapasso mean? Do you have any idea, Angelique? I'm putting you on the spot.
Isn't it like the stance? It's like a naturalistic stance that they adopted, I believe, first in with some of the Greek stuff to show like a natural body position.
I knew I'd get you on that. Your answer is 100% incorrect. It's because that's contrapposto, when you throw your hip out like this and you're changing your body weight and whatnot. Contrapasso means you're suffering the same kind of punishment in equivalency with the kind of sin that you committed. So if you steal something with your right hand, the right punishment is to cut off your right hand or something like that. That's what the contrappasso means. Contrapposto, that's a little bit different. You're just kind of shifting your body weight around. So I'm sorry I picked on you. Now I feel regret in my heart, Angelique Antonini.
It's okay. They're very similar words. Like they sound the same, so it's easy to get confused.
I don't even know if that's German or Russian, frankly. All right, so thank you for playing with us. But the sins that are perpetrated in the life are met with a mirror image of suffering in the afterlife. All in all, the painting's symmetry is striking, with the corners reinforcing the didactic message of the center. Remember, beware, beware. God is watching. These 7 deadly sins unfold. So Bosch illustrates the various deadly sins with vignettes from daily life. And we're just going to trace it all the way around. But there's so much space, front and center, right at the bottom of this iris, given to this first deadly sin, that we're going to start there. And then I'm going to go around counterclockwise. All right. And I've peeled these pictures off with images that I was able to find for free on the internet. Thanks be to God for the internet, right? So the first one is IRA, era. And if you know anything about the deadly sins, you know that one of them is anger. This is wrath. What do you see? I see a fat guy that almost looks like Martin Luther. Frankly, I think this looks like Martin Luther. It's not supposed to be Martin Luther because Martin Luther was just a little kid. But it's just starting the Reformation when this was painted in 1517 or whatever. But notice what is going on. We got a couple of people with knives drawn and a woman, probably this guy's wife, trying to hold this guy back from slicing the guy who's about to hit him with a chair. This looks like everyday life. This is not some kind of abstraction. This is just everyday life. It's a bar brawl with weapons drawn and furniture broken. As we go to the right, as we go around, this is superbia. Superbia. It's a Latin word that means pride. Superbus aum, proud. Superbia. You see the back of a woman who is checking her wimple, checking her hat, checking her hair, making sure that she's primping, because right here in the detail is a mirror. You can just see half of her face. She's making sure that she looks perfect. I don't know how closely you can see the detail here. Do you see who's holding the mirror? It's a pretty creepy, freaky picture of a devil or a demon. Yeah, do you see that?
Yes.
This is 100% Hieronymus Bosch. There's some freaky stuff coming. I'm just showing you the good theological ground for getting inside his friar head to think about how he considers the sins and the import of this. This is a woman primping in front of the mirror as a picture of pride. No, this is not an abstraction. This is an everyday thing. Just like the 7 of you probably looked in the mirror today before you got dressed, etc. Just make sure you look good. That's pride. This one's interesting. I wonder what you can see in this. This is the picture of luxuria, which gives us in the English language its cognate, the deadly sin of lust. Luxuria, lust. What would you expect to see in a depiction of lust? You might think about sex first and foremost, and there may be some kind of dalliance about to happen. Notice we've got a tent that can cover some things up, and we've got a double date. Here's a guy and his girlfriend. Here's a lady and her boyfriend, and it looks like they're just having a nice picnic outside. Do you have any idea what's going on here? Kaylee looks like she's disgusted right now. She's like, "Oh my God, what is going on there?" That's also not contrapposto. That's a different posture altogether. I don't know. These are, because we can see what they're dressed as. This is a clown, some kind of a jester. He's got this weird headdress on, and he's bent over, and somebody's beating him with a big spoon or something like this. They're just clowning around. This is just ribald entertainment, slapstick comedy. Doing nothing at all that's worthwhile for anybody. This is what luxuria is, which is also symbolized by the fruit that's around here, by the musical instruments. You got a clarinet and a harp and a drum. They're just all scattered around here. This is symbolism for intemperance, for the luxurious life, for lust. Again, it's not abstract. It's quite natural for people to go out on picnics. At least they're outside and socially distanced because they don't have masks on. This is acedia or acidia, which in Latin is translated as laziness. And we know it as in the seven deadly sins as the sin of sloth, S-L-O-T-H. This is likely a monk who has fallen asleep. Do you see why he's fallen asleep? What do you see? What's this white thing behind his head?
Would be a pillow.
It's a pillow. Yeah, he's sitting up in his prayer chair, but he's brought a pillow because he wants to be cozy. And we've got Mary, quite contrary, the nun back here who's holding the rosary and saying, "Hey, brother, you got to get up and get going." But he has even left his little book over here unopened. He's just being lazy. This is the student that says, "I know it was 7:30, but I slept through my alarm. After all, look at my dog. He felt so cozy." All of these symbols of laziness or sloth. Again, not abstract, but just a basic everyday vignette. This is gula, G-U-L-A, a Roman word for what? What do you think this is depicting? Somebody tell me.
Gluttony?
This is gluttony. Yes, absolutely. You can tell. You can tell it's gluttony because there's meat on the floor, but don't worry, the servant or the wife is coming in with another turkey, and you got the dad here whose fat kid is begging for whatever kind of booze is in the pitcher. Notice this guy. He's not even sipping from a cup. He's not civilized at all. He's drinking it straight from the bottle. And what else have we got? It's difficult to see this unless you're really close up. But here in the detail, there is an owl in the vent. Now, for Hieronymus Bosch, everything's symbolic. An owl represents for him sin, wickedness, evil. It's not just because he's a bird of prey. But gluttony is one of the deadly sins. Notice the house, too. It's kind of dirty. We got a fire going on the floor. We've got meat on the spit. We've got a cauldron over here. We've got a tripod that's knocked over. And we've got the night chair right here. Do you know what a night chair is? A night chair is a chair with a hole in the middle of it. What's that hole for, kids?
Potty.
Every glutton needs to go potty in their kitchen, evidently. All right. Food handling 101 tells you that's a deadly sin. What else have we got? Avaricia. What's avaricia? It's greed, avarice. It's when a judge will be happy to take a bribe from a rich man and take a bribe from a poor man, and those who are in the jury will look on and know that something wicked is going on, but they'll turn a blind eye to it. Yet again, not an abstraction, but a scene from daily life. Invidia, where a man brings a rose to another man's wife, where a tax collector holding this bone that one dog and another dog want can look with envy at this guy who has just purchased a falcon, and another guy looks back at him in envy with a load on his back. There's envy all over the place, leading us to a proverb that says, when there's one bone and two dogs, there's going to be an argument. Envy, the deadly sin. Which brings us back full circle to anger. And so it's circular, it just keeps on going and going. Notice that the four last things include symbols. This is death, the tondo in the top left. We're going to go left to right in clockwise fashion, from death to judgment to heaven to hell, so that we can see a little bit more of Hieronymus Bosch's symbolism, with the skeleton man back here pointing an arrow at the dead guy to demonstrate that he's going to die. He's symbolizing his death, but here's the devil and here's an angel who are going to be wrestling over the soul of that dead guy once he finally dies. Nobody can see the skeleton man. Nobody can see the devil and the angel. That's left to the gazer. That's left to you and me. Here's Jesus in his triumphal glory, just like the Last Judgment of Michelangelo, from near the same century, right? With all of the dead coming out of their graves, the Last Judgment. And several of them going into heaven, being welcomed by St. Peter, St. Michael, and into the realms of glory where Jesus lives, until we finally get to hell. But in hell, you'll notice this contrapasso stuff that Angelique was helping us out with. Here is the luxuria, but instead of having fun in the tent with a double date, what we end up with instead is the couple being tormented by rats, being tormented by unearthly creatures through the rest of their eternal existence. The superbia, remember that woman who was staring at herself in the mirror? Now she's being forced to look in the mirror at her ugly shame while a toad is infecting her genitalia for the rest of eternity. The greedy judge is now enjoying a bath in boiling oil, while the man who is angry with those swords drawn is being drawn and quartered with the same swords on a huge Procrustean bed. Those who were envious are now being cut up. Those who were lazy are now being beaten by somebody who looks like that same nun who was trying to wake them up. And those who were gluttonous are now being force-fed. And again, it's difficult to see in this detail. It's a little fuzzy for you probably, but they're being forced to eat snakes and lizards and rats and things like that. So those vignettes have their answer in the tondo of hell. Bosch's punished sinners who only see themselves and have their body parts attacked and are forever in shame show us that the entire painting is a warning to all sinners that they take heed to the viewer of all. The ones that are viewing this painting are themselves being viewed. Cave, cave, Dominus videt. Beware, beware, the Lord is watching. The warning at the center of God's vigilant eye is meant as a literal warning to the viewer. And the inscription that Bosch lays out at the top and at the bottom of the painting also seem to deny the prospect of redemption, which the paradise tondo of the bottom right holds out. Bosch quotes Deuteronomy chapter 32 here. Gens obsque concilio est et sine prudentia, utinam saperent et telegerent, ac novissima providerent. This people is absent of counsel and wisdom. Oh, would that they be wise and understand and discern their end. He continues on in verse 20 of Deuteronomy chapter 32, in the bottom ribbon here, that says, Abscondam faciam meam ab eis. I will hide my face from them. Bosch has indeed hidden God's face here, or at least his eye, in the center of the painting with God's face in Christ staring at the viewer from the pupil. The pupil means a little self. It means the reflection. If you ever stare into somebody's eye real closely, you'll see your own reflection in their pupil. That's why it's called a pupil, because you can see your reflection in their eye. That note is not lost on this artist, Hieronymus Bosch. And it might offer us as a viewer justification for taking on the role of God himself, looking on these sins and seeing that they deserve punishment. But from that perspective, notice that the sin vignettes do not appear wholly abhorrent. Lust is kind of funny. It's a relatively tame country picnic. They're not in flagrante delicto. You don't see any kind of sex scene going on here. It's all within a pretty pleasant place. It's not the expected depiction of what you'd expect for lust. Instead of portraying the deadly sins as abstract personifications, Bosch illustrates them in scenes that are instantly recognizable, and they're also humorous in an earthy way in order to convey their meaning more effectively. What I'm trying to say about this is that Bosch is offering his viewer a complex theology made up of at least two perspectives, made up of what God sees, made up of what we see. What God sees is sin that he's going to vindicate himself over in all walks of life, from peasants to lords, from the faithful to those who do not believe in him. All of us, as we're drawn around the tabletop, see the more colorful and maybe indeed the more humorous bits of the mundane. And yet we can't deny these last four things, knowing what everyday life is gearing us up for, the everyday sins that are going to meet us. Those warning words of God inscribed on the painting are our reminders. I'm going to close with this. If this piece is didactic, that is, it's intending to teach towards an end, it would seem that a lesson learned would lead to a change of heart. One wonders whether any answers to the subject of the tabletop were forthcoming in the possible companion piece to the artwork that Philip II also may have owned, namely a tabletop depicting the 7 sacraments. We don't have a tabletop of the 7 sacraments. All we've got is this, the tabletop of the 7 deadly sins. If we do not have a redemptive mirror image reflecting a human hope, then what we do have left within Bosch's wheel of sin teaches the lesson that the God of the Christian Middle Ages, for all of his allowing just regular human life to go on in all of its frivolity, that God still means serious business. So cave, Dominus videt. Watch out. The Lord is watching. On one final note, I would love to have a tabletop like this to play poker with my buddies. Wouldn't it be great to sit at the anger side? Hey, I want envy. You know, you just sit and you play. I think it'd be great, but I'm going to stop there. Dr. Mallinson, what do you think?
Well, thank you very much, because that really sets up where I want to go next really well, and I can actually get to business a little faster here. I think you've very, very nicely set up what's going on here. Yeah, it's didactic. Yeah, it's there's moralism here, but he's also much more interesting than just a Sunday school teacher, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to go. And Stacy and I went to Madrid, because here you've got this guy that on one hand is, he's kind of giving you these medieval common, concepts about judgment, sin, and the afterlife. And yet here's somebody also who's interesting to the Salvador Dalis, and really in some ways Dali is interesting, but maybe less is there. Right. I mean, like I like Dali. I think he's interesting, but sometimes you're like, okay, he's being fun and having a good time. I want to explore something that I'm not sure I'm going to stay with. And the reason I'm not going to stay with it is that the conventional reading of Bosch is a respectable one, and probably one that's easier to defend. And let me just tell you what the standard take on Bosch is. He's a pious Christian man with frightful visions of hell and ghouls, meant to motivate late medieval society towards moral living. This is like his family tradition all the way up until this point is involved in these pageants related to the selling of indulgences, related to the passion plays, related to these religious festivals, minstrels, all the artists that come into town. And also, though, for Bosch, a unique situation, which is Bosch's family is able to get commissions that make them enough money that put them into high society. A lot of the time, actresses and artists are kind of like athletes. We see that they are respected. I wouldn't say respected. They're admired. They are famous. They are people that are talked about, but they're also sometimes not honored, right? They're seen as lower in caste than those who have an elite status. But Bosch's family, because they're able to get some of these really nice contracts, is really able to enter into in his little town the high society. And by the time Bosch, he's got several brothers and sisters, his father is part of this art community. They're not famous, but they're doing all right, and they're making some money. He's able to join this thing called the the Illustrious Brotherhood of the Blessed Virgin. It's like what Erasmus of Rotterdam was part of. It was this late medieval spiritual movement that recognized the sins of the church, recognized the corruption of the church, but also was very spiritual, was very pious. For Erasmus, this did not mean to, leaving the church, but it did mean that he was allowed through his art and through his friend Thomas More's literature. That's what I mean by art. They were allowing themselves the opportunity to critique, or to provide a criticism rather of the corruption of the church, not because they were bad kids, but because they were the good kids. And yet they aren't so square that they're not able to do some weird things here and there. I mean, like they're big people. They're adults that are able to have some fun. But most people do recognize, and this is I would fully agree with, that the what we're about to see here with the Garden of Earthly Delights is what they would call a nuptial mirror. And the idea is that this is a lesson not for the church, but for a married couple, a noble married couple. And this makes a big difference, because what we're going to see looks like it should be something behind the altar. It should be something that you would expect in a chapel or in a church, but in fact, it was in a bedroom. And the other thing that's interesting about all of this, and I think you pick up a little bit of this with that beautiful that table, is the idea that it's both there to be didactic and fun. Docere et delectare. It's both to teach and to delight. It's to entertain and to teach you something. And I think this is what's going on right now. Stacey and I are watching The Crown. We're enjoying it as a. I mean, I'm not sure we loved the last season. Mainly because we grew up with the last season with Lady Diana, and now it's like it's kind of letting us down. The earlier stuff that we didn't know enough about, it was more informative, but sometimes they go hand in hand, that there's this story that's compelling and it's also entertaining. And these are all true. I'm not saying the conventional take on Bosch is wrong, with perhaps the top part. A pious Christian man, maybe. I believe he's deeply spiritual. But I have this sense, and I'm still toying with it, and I will reject it at the end. There's only a few of us here, so we can make some mistakes. I would like to argue that he was doing something that was more mystical, and that through his art, he was trying to find beauty in a violent world, a frightening world, a world that was, for a 13-year-old boy who saw his town on fire, where 4,000 homes were destroyed. The same kind of fear that Martin Luther experiences when he sees art in church. We love God, but God can also be an ass kicker. You know, this God is not tame, to be sure, but he's also created a world that maybe is partly his fault, right? Like we didn't do this on purpose. This is a madhouse, and yet maybe it's God like that made this happen, not us. I mean, we obviously have our sins, you know, but there are all these other factors that are going into it. And I also think that what he's doing therefore is he's trying to express the inexpressible, the ineffable, and he's doing it through art. And that's important spiritually. I think it's a theological text, but it's a creative theological text, the Garden of Earthly Delights. And I'm taking my cue from the first account of somebody seeing this in 1517, a year after Bosch dies. This guy Antonio de Beatus says this painting that he saw was fantastical, quote, fantastical in such a way that it is impossible to describe it properly to someone who's never seen it. He's like, this is not something you would see elsewhere. And I overstated my case earlier when I said that the Prado has nothing but topless Virgin Marys and bloody Jesuses, but a lot of it is that, right? So when you get to this other piece of art that's still kind of fitting with these theological themes, it's definitely it's gonna get your attention. And it got everyone's attention at the Prado. I mean, there are these rooms where there might be 5 people in it on a Saturday, and then I can't get up to the front of this piece. Now, what's nice about what we see here is that this is what the piece looks like when it's closed. So if you imagine like a dartboard where you can pull open the dartboard and you get a little chalk on the side, this is the outer piece. In the upper left, you see God looking down at creation, and this is day 3, as the whole thing is closed. This is occurring easily 10 years, 15 years after Columbus sails the ocean blue, and shows that the Earth is not necessarily going to look like this. So he doesn't see it literally this way, I don't think, but he does also see a couple things, and that is that before the world kind of comes to life, it's in black and white, which makes a lot of sense to us. Well, maybe not to you, but to me, as a kid who had grandparents who grew up during the Depression. They had black and white TVs, and they never in their lifetime got a color TV because they didn't have their black and white TV die, and they were products of the Great Depression. They weren't going to waste money on color. But here it is in almost, or you could think about the Wizard of Oz, this odd idea that you could use color or bring things to life with color to make this very stark and dramatic effect. But here's God. He's looking at this world. It's very organic. It's something that we're going to see that fits more with Lucretius and even with Darwin in some ways than with this idea that there's this emphasis on the de novo creation of everything. Now we've got to look at Adam and Eve here in a second, but there's God looking at the world. And then if you imagine, again, where you're going to see this, when this originally was installed, it was in a nobleman's home, in his bedroom, and that the painting was going to be over a bed that could fit, probably not, but the accounts were that 50 people could all hang out in this bed. They could get drunk and fall asleep in this bed, which sounds really weird until you know that in the Middle Ages, people tended to all sleep together. So you'd have, the in-laws and the dog and some servants and your cousins, everyone sleeping together. It keeps you warm. So it wasn't as weird, but it also was a bedroom, right? So it wasn't a church. And I think that's important for us to recognize. It's also important for us, again, to recognize the color. But as you open up, it's like, the dramatic effect of going to somebody's house, maybe having a couple glasses of wine, and then having them say, hey, let me show you what Bosco gave me. Now, I say Bosco because that's totally anachronistic. In Spain, they claim him as their own. And there's a bit of an international controversy going on where the Netherlands wants to get some of this art back. specifically at the hometown of Bosch, right, where people come to visit, and yet they can't go to the hometown of Hieronymus Bosch and see the Garden of Earthly Delights. They got to go to Madrid. So there have been some times where there's some frustration there. But imagine that you then open this thing up and you see all of this color. And this isn't even good enough. This is a little bit too like sepia tone. As you get closer, you start to realize that there is a lot of attention that's gone into this painting. And it's famous. There are these same themes that you could see in other Bosch paintings. But this one, this is his Dark Side of the Moon. This is his Achtung Baby. This is his Sergeant Pepper. He just takes all of everything that he's been thinking about, throws it into one creative act. What I really like in the upper middle is, I think this kind of clued me into something, is the way in which birds seem to kind of have a soul. But I don't mean this in any funky way, other than there was a filmmaker who studied philosophy. He majored in philosophy, named Malik, and he wrote he's crafted some films that have varying degrees of popular reception and success. But my colleague David Schultz refuses to recommend this to people because everyone gets mad at him. But he recommended it to me, and I loved it. And it was the Tree of Life. Malik's Tree of Life is about a parent and child, a husband and wife whose child has died. And the question that goes up to God is why? Why, God, why? Why have you forsaken us? And the first 15 minutes of this film are just nature scenes. There's no philosophical answer. And my proposal to you this evening is that what Bosch is doing is theodicy, that he's struggling with the problem of evil. He's struggling with, okay, yes, there's judgment. Yes, we deserve to wallow in our own mire here of poop that we've created. At the same time, God, why? Why is this the plan? And I want to propose to you that the answer is a happy answer, even though this is a disturbing painting in some ways. I think precisely because it's disturbing, it makes it more interesting when we get to the point of recognizing the beauty in it, or the hope in it. Part of the hope, though, is this idea that even when you can't see the spirit moving or God at work, these birds, these probably are swifts or a common poorwill. I don't know, but these are like a chimney swift. These are these nighthawks, I think. But the main thing is that these are not supposed to be flying in this way, but birds do flock, and they tend to have this fluid motion, and they're going in this case through something that is not seen today, really not seen in the past. It's this kind of organic, also space age kind of thing, which also leads me to suggest something that I will not let you hold me to later, that he was a time traveler. The only thing I can really deal with here is, the only way I can really make sense of this is that Hieronymus Bosch got in a time traveling machine with Bill and Ted, and they've seen the whole universe in the future and in the past, because I've never even heard of any painting that has these sorts of things. You'll see in the upper right, you'll see a phallic imagery that also kind of coalesces with a mushroom imagery. And I bring this up because one of the theses that or one of the things I'll suggest is that there may have been some kind of pharmacological thing going on, not because he was a recreational drug user, but rather because what are we coming off of? We're coming off of a period of great struggle with pathogens, with disease, with the plague. And some of the greatest religious minds, like Theodore Beza, a hyper-Calvinist, Martin Luther himself, Julian of Norwich, you start to see people that have these experiences with disease that then have a conversion experience. Often it's what they say drove them to becoming Protestants. They were Catholic, they were sick and dying, they had some medicine, and then they had this awareness of the gospel, and then they decided to convert. I believe that it's entirely possible that whatever the apothecaries were concocting, there were many different herbs and things that people knew through oral tradition up until about the 1580s, when 45,000 apothecaries, they were also called witches in Tuscany, were killed through the Inquisition. So there was fear of the Reformation, there was fear of witchcraft. But what are we looking at? We're looking at something on the eve of all of that. We're looking at something a year before Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg church door. Now, maybe this was painted in 1510, 1512, but we know that people start to comment on it in 1517. So the church isn't as alerted to that fear. They're worried about Islam, they're worried about Judaism, but not so worried about some of these other things that will come up. And yet you've got the Lollards, you've got William of Ockham, you've got various people that are challenging the church. And in this case, here's a guy who's challenging the church in a way that's not immediately apparent. And in fact, what I want to say is I think he is challenging the church, but he's doing so as a good churchman, and he's doing so as a pious man. He's doing so as a member of a community that is mostly clerics. And he probably was either like a lay religious, that is, like, he could get married, but he still was involved in a regular liturgical life. And I believe that this was something really important to him. So like spirituality was important to him. At the same time, we can't know for sure, because often, people will join these fraternal organizations for status reasons, for the ability to hobnob with the wealthy and with the high exalted people within society. And so I think that one of the things that's going on is he's using religious imagery to subvert some of the aspects of religion. I think he's telling a different story, but I might be wrong. The first reason is, if you want to show sin, you don't have to enjoy it that much. Like, he gets into it. He's not just like, so the piece that Dr. Armstrong was showing is like, all right, I'm with him. I'm like, I understand, like, this is bad. This is what you're going to get. Now it's like, I'm going to show you some sinful things that are, well, notice their faces. People aren't all that worried about it. It seems to me. And I have a take, I got to tell you, that is different from all of the books that I've got here beside me. Partly because there are people, I think, that comment on these things that are coming at it from, the old European Catholicism. They love the seedy nature of some of these things, but they also ultimately are not Americans. And by this, I mean, Americans, I don't know, by disposition, we're ready to just blow the whole thing up. So, maybe that's my blind spot. And I think it very well could be. Now, what you see here is, of course, sensuality, but you see a couple other things. You see the owl that Dr. Armstrong pointed out, hiding out. The owl for Bosch is this lurking doom. This could be the devil. This could be sin. This could be temptation. This is ominous. And here's this guy, he's kind of like, hey, what's up, buddy? Why don't you cuddle me? Like this couple over here, the couple in the bubble. What's the couple in the bubble dealing with? They are in this blissful, sensual state. And it's not sinful. It's not promiscuous, but the world that they're in seems to be cracking. So in nature, we can have these sensual relationships. We can enjoy our food. We can enjoy sex. But also, without these boundaries, all of a sudden things are going to get a little silly. But I want to say there's nothing necessary. There's nothing necessary about a good churchman, putting fruit on somebody's crotch and having them do a headstand in the water. I mean, this is absurd. This is out of control. This is not right. This is out of control, friends. You've got a wonderful. This is a wonderful giraffe. But I want this two-legged dog. Look at this two-legged dog, and then the little dragon baby. He is taking you to a place that may have been understood to be an antediluvian, that is a pre-flood world that is no longer with us. But he's also entering you into a world of imagination. He's breaking down the conventions so that we can kind of think about these things in new ways. For instance, you got mermaids. You've got mermaid nights. Bad idea. It's going to rust. You're going to drown. Apparently, there's a raspberry cult. People going back into an egg, symbol of fertility. My favorite is a naked guy doing yoga while a deer says, "Hey, buddy, you want to play?" What the hell's going on? This doesn't make sense. Why is the deer talking to the naked guy? And regardless, why is Bosch painting this? At first, I thought that this image here, this is in the bottom left-hand corner of the triptych. I thought this might do in fact relate to an older version, not of natural selection, but of evolution. The more I thought about it, the more I think it at its very basic level refers to this almost psychologically challenging problem, or not problem, but the creepiness of spontaneous generation. And prior to the scientific revolution, people tended to think that all sorts of creepy crawlies come out of the mud, because they do, but they thought that it naturally came out of the mud, and so that this expresses God's fertile world, right? And so this stuff's coming out at the same time. Where do these things come from? You're not supposed to be able to see this kind of thing, but this is Eden. You're going to see it in a second. The other thing I find interesting is the use of these interesting cylinders that I see as kind of synthetic. Maybe they're glass. Maybe I'm a total fool. Maybe like the big deal at the time was, like in Superman, where you've got these little crystals. Maybe they thought it was a crystal. I just find it so strange that these come up over and over again. And there's the camel. What's going on? A lot of exploration has just recently happened. Now, if you're looking at literary texts, one of the things that's really interesting to people, and really interesting up until Dr. Armstrong and I were kids, is lost civilizations, the noble savage. Why aren't they wearing clothes? Why do they think twine is an acceptable pair of pants, one piece of twine? And yet there's like a titillation to it. It's like, man, so people don't wear clothes and they just eat animals on their fire in the middle of the jungle. There's something that's attractive to it, and to civilized European kids, kind of scary, kind of abhorrent. There's another thing that comes up throughout his paintings, including an image of the Magi, and that is the inclusion of dark-skinned people. Now, some people have argued that what Bosch is talking about is maybe more of a kind of a racist thing, where you're dealing with the curse and Ham and so forth. But I tend to think that this has to do with the abundance and the diversity of creation. That just like there's all these interesting animals that blow your mind, if you can expand beyond just whatever you see in your backyard, the human species, the human race is also very diverse. If I'm right, this is one of the earliest images of a European painter, just including diversity, Black people, into the paintings. Again, I may be wrong. It may also be that the dark version of this, the bad, sinful version of this, would be that this is playing into this idea that African people are more sensual, more lustful, more interested looking in this cherry, the fruit of sin and lust and that sort of thing. I don't have time to show you this, but I dare you to go and check it out. But this painting on the butt of a dude in hell has been transcribed, and somebody has put it to music, so you can actually hear what the music is. It's kind of scary. It's the hell music. But the reason I think it's interesting is that that Bosch actually put a tune there. So like there's all these details we might think, well, it's just funny or weird in this mural. Yeah, it might be funny and weird, but there's also something going on there. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to just see what kind of chat things here. I believe that the Devil's Interval is in there as well, which doesn't really come up again, by the way, until A Mighty Fortress is Our God. Let's see here, Goldbug. Yes. Now, thank you for mentioning alchemy, because in many ways, that's really probably our best way to understand a lot of this, because when you see like Albrecht Dürer came, oh come on, I gotta close this up. Albrecht Dürer actually came and checked out this painting, And Dürer is a great example of somebody who is really interested in the symbolism of things. And unfortunately for us, therefore, as much as I'm enjoying taking these guesses, the only thing I'm confident in is that it really shouldn't be interpreted purely conventionally. It shouldn't be interpreted purely in terms of an Orthodox Catholicism, and it shouldn't be interpreted in terms of a Salvador Dali 20th century counterculture. There's something else going on that is part of all this coding that relates to these signals that people are sending. And sometimes those signals that people send aren't, because they're not literal, they seem a little more stressful, I suppose, than they need to be. But here we see ice skating, which is fun. Here we see another. They're called goat suckers. So there's like the common poor will, the night hawk, and so forth. It's a type of bird that comes out at night. So it's probably kind of scary to him, but it was something that he would have seen a lot. But here's the so-called hell side. Now I'm going to come back to all this. I'm just showing you some things, and I'll come back to what I think it means in a second. But there's a bird who's eating people. Notice while the bird's eating people, birds are also flying out of this guy's butt. One of the things you're going to find about the Garden of Earthly Delights is there's a lot of butt stuff. There are things coming out of butts. There are farts coming out of butts, things going into butts, flowers going into butts, arrows going into butts, things are coming in and out of butts. People are playing trumpet with their butts. And now I guess birds are coming out of butts. It's not necessary, Bosch. So he's got an issue here, it seems to me. Like you could do one or two of these, but like, now it's getting pretty pervasive. And he's got this chamber pot on his head. It is true that until very recently, people did not have flush toilets. Well, I say this, when I was in Bath, England, we were outside of a house of somebody who had a clay floor, dirt floor, and a thatched roof. And then we went to view the ruins of Roman bathhouse that also had running water and heat in the under the floors. And so, it's not the case that things always progress in the same direction. For a lot of the Middle Ages, people just, kind of built out like an outhouse, and then you just poop down the wall, which was unfortunate, especially during times of disease. But here is this beast that's pooping people out, eating people, and then pooping them into this hole. There's another dude, if you can see, pooping coins into that hole. There's a dude who's drunk, and he's puking into the hole as a nun helps him puke, because I guess they were getting drunk together. I'm not sure what to make of why some people are black and white. There's also a gal to the left there, and she is being caressed by like a wombat. I don't know how this guy sees this. I don't know. Did they get to Australia then? This doesn't make any sense to me. But the thing that's weirder is the astronaut in the butt of the green person. And at that point, you got to say, this guy did go into outer space. Like this when somebody is in a spacesuit in the butt of a green person, all bets are off. But the thing that is the most disturbing to me, and I'm not sure what to make of it, is the indulgence that's on the leg of that man that's being, his ear is being kissed by the nun pig. And the reason I think this is important is because it seems that Bosch's family was part of the hustle. That is his dad, his brothers. They would have been maybe making murals. Maybe they would have done set design for passion plays that were happening in town. But the deal is, in some ways, and I like what Rebecca was saying, Dr. Armstrong, that you see Christ in the center of the piece you're looking at. And a good Lutheran perspective, focus on Christ, and all the other stuff, you're going to get past all that. Yes, that's true. Now the question is, are we allowed to indulge in all the things that are in this painting? And you can't see the perspective, but if you start from left to right, by the time you get to the bottom right, the answer is maybe. So the non-Lutheran interpretation, or the interpretation that is uncomfortable for Lutherans, is that if you join with the church, you can have all these blessings. It's like the atheist philosopher Slavoj Žižek says, the Catholic Church is what makes sex fun for Europeans. It's like, imagine a hose. If you got a hose that's, you turn on the water and you just hold the hose out, the water isn't going to go out very far. But if you put your thumb on it, it shoots out the water. And so what Žižek says is that the Catholic Church kind of allows the sensuality of life to be a little more kinky because it's bad, because it's risky, because it's dangerous. And yet it also gives you a way to indulge in those things and then get an indulgence. So here's this guy who's been through arguably all through this landscape, but he's able to find forgiveness in it through the church. But the reason I say that it's controversial to me, or it's I'm not quite sure about it, is I'm not sure if he thinks this is a good thing or a bad thing. If he's maybe even criticizing his own family's implication in this indulgence thing. And part of the reason I think this is because I am not convinced that hell is hell for him in this painting. If you look closely inside of this tree man, this is a vision from hell. The people in hell are actually just partying and they're having a good old time having drinks. And it reminds me more of Vegas. It reminds me of Hunter S. Thompson. It reminds me of the idea that sometimes people are hungover in the morning and proud of it. And not that they necessarily should be, but it's like, this is why I say it's theodicy, because I got to wrap this up. Because what I think is going on is that there's all of this world that's created because we're organic beings. We have biological desires. We want to eat berries. We want to have food. We want to have sex. We want to go swimming. We like fish. We like to fly. Whatever these things are. I should mention, there's a dude in a bass drum, and then there's a demon beating on the bass drum while somebody else farts out a tune in a flute onto the dude in the bass drum, which is that sucks. That's a bad version of hell. Also to the left, you see a bird putting its beak in somebody's butt, and then on the right, there's somebody putting a bouquet of flowers in somebody's butt. I don't think this is necessary if you're just trying to prove what's sinful. Mention this. One other thing, what on earth is this detritus? Now it's supposed to be these gems, but it also kind of reminds me of the various things that wash up in the Gulf Coast when my wife and I are staying there for free. Plastics. It just seems like there's a bunch of plastic crap, but I suppose I'm wrong. Now let me get you to something that you deserve, because I'm your professor friend, and now let me tell you something. All that other stuff, that was we're just walking through this landscape. Here's the thing that I think I see. On the very far left, he's setting up heaven, he's setting up creation and hell, creation to judgment. But what I want to argue is that this is not primarily to be seen chronologically. This is seen to me as a spiritual investigation into your own life, into your own relationship to God and to nature and to sensuality and to each other and to the physical world. You see Adam, he's relaxing. Here's God kind of introducing Adam and Eve after the creation. Now God looks like Jesus, and that's on purpose. So God's work, he's walking with Adam in the dew of the evening, and what does he look like? He looks like Jesus. And there's an interesting hierarchy here where the woman is a little bit higher actually than the man, interestingly there. And the thing that I want to show you though, and because we're out of time, I just want to get right to the point. Jesus is looking straight at us saying, shit's going to get crazy. The price of admission to this existence is pain. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with it, but it is a long-standing tradition. It's the blessed fall of Augustine, that there's some way in which God has to apologize to us for making the freedom of existence possible. That for us to be robots is insufficient, but the price of us not being robots is our own self-destructive behaviors. And so Jesus is looking at us, God is looking at us saying, be at peace. Things are going to get crazy. Adam, Eve, I love you. Here is bliss. Now you get to invite yourself, and I invite you to exist. But existence is going to lead to this same kind of figure saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Why have you forsaken me, God? Why do you not seem to be here? And if you go, and this is this insight that I had with Stacy as we walked over 4 hours from left to right. It's a huge, huge piece. By the time I walked from left to right, I finally understood the first piece, the first insight. And the insight was the same hand, and I couldn't have understood it otherwise than going there, the same hand that has Jesus saying, be at peace, I give you blessing, is the hand at the very end that is on a shield that's in a bar fight. And in this bar fight, somebody throws a knife. It sticks in this hand. And the hand also is involving a certain kind of chance. That there's a chance to providence, or there's a chaos, there's a randomness to providence that's built in. The numbers work out in the end for goodness, truth, and beauty. But there are moments when just crappy things happen. And if you want to think of God as is orchestrating every bad thing that happens in your life, right? Then it's going to throw you off. You're going to be misunderstanding the world. You're going to be a Calvinist, which you're allowed to be, but it's sad. I don't know if everybody's still here yet, but if you get sick and you're sad, God's not doing this to you directly, but this is part of the price of this creation, and who pays the price ultimately? The hand is pierced. This is the stigmata. This is the crucified Jesus, I argue, so that the same hand is severed, and that we are detached from Christ, but that Christ also is with us in this suffering, that Christ understands the suffering, and that even though Bosch is judging all of the sin, and that Jesus is judging the sin, and God judges the sin, there's also a deep compassion that we're trapped in this world that is kind of natural, that like the things that we lust after are things that are tasty, and the fruit is fruit that tastes good. And so it's reasonable to assume that this is again a theodicy, because, and this is the key thing, is I stood back, I got to the end, then I went to the restroom, and then Stacy and I stood back at the back, and we said, I think the big point of it all is that despite all the suffering, there's paradise on the left, so-called hell on the right. Hell is not as hellish as that we think. It's people are having a little bit more fun. It's more like Vegas versus just out like Garden of the Gods outside of Colorado Springs. The thing that really sold it for me is as I packed off, I see that the dance in the middle of the painting is going counterclockwise. And the dance going counterclockwise says this to me, that this is like a maypole dance. This is pagan in a certain sense, but it is lush. That on the left, God says, here we go. This is existence. It's going to be painful. I'm going to give you free will. You're going to botch it. This world that you're going to live in is both judged and beautiful. But if you stand back, it's not ugly. When you get close, there's some ugliness. There's people farting on you and torturing you. But if you pull back, the big picture is beauty. It is the joy of existence, and that it's not necessarily going from heaven to hell, but that, and I would argue this, you can stand either in blessedness with Christ, or you can be apart from Christ in the same world. That the kingdom of God starts now and is eternal, and the kingdom of death starts now and is eternal. And that instead of worrying just about the afterlife, you should worry about, how do you view this life? How do you view nature? How do you view our relationships with one another? Because there are all these options. And if you, if you don't relate properly to each other, to your spouse, to the natural world, that's what hell is. And in the upper right, you see an image of 4,000 homes from his childhood burning. And what burns them? Mismanagement, falsehood, lies, deceit, and that sort of thing. And so ultimately, I'm not at all saying that, there we go. I'm not at all saying that Bosch is not concordant with Orthodox Christian theology, but I think he's saying something beyond that. He's saying that that even with a world that is filled with sin and ultimate judgment, that the whole game was worth it. That the overall picture of this creation, this blessing that we have, is a gift, and that our job is to properly discern how to live in the gift in a way that is going to bring us into blessedness rather than to our own self-imposed hell, which then, of course, as Dr. Armstrong pointed out, is going to come back on us. Like we're going to be the ones that feed us our own doom, and it is not God apologizing to us, but God showing us through Bosch, I would argue, or Bosch showing us that what God did was both beautiful and just, merciful and just at the same time. That's what I got. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. And I put this in an email, but every time I see it, man, I think it's hilarious. I just threw the link in the chat. You can actually get close up and three-dimensional with the figurines of the Hieronymus Bosch Garden of Earthly Delights, even including that bird who is on the a chair eating the soul of the guy who's got birds flying out of his butt, etc. And give that to Grandma Schmidt and see, get a thank you note for Christmas.
They're better than Star Wars figures.
Pretty crazy. But
Hey, Jeff?
Yes.
It's me. I just wanted to know if you'd heard that there's a children's book about Hieronymus Bosch, a picture book for kids.
That's obscene. I disapprove.
It's really interesting. It's called Pish Posh, said Hieronymus Bosch.
I'm looking it up right now. That is fantastic.
It's great. Yeah, I just looked it up. I found it in our school library, so it's a lot of fun. And the artist did a great job illustrating it. Pish Posh, said Hieronymus Bosch. Or just Google Hieronymus Bosch children's book.
I found it.
Yep, it's silly. It's about how he met his wife, and it's very odd and absurdist and strange. It's fun. I did not read that to my kindergartners, however. Yeah. So.
Ella, were you signaling a question? Thank you, Rebecca. That's fantastic. That's great. Any other questions for either of us or comments for either of us? I know we're over time. Sorry, I didn't see the time.
I'm happy to stick around. Honestly, any feedback, any questions, you want to see something in more detail, just bring it on.
Because we're almost there on Thanksgiving, let me just show you one thing, and that is what you really should do is explore this on your own. Because,
Good job.
if you go here, this not only has the overall detail, but then you can click in on, let's say, the mermaids, and then it'll draw you in, and then somebody will they'll talk to you about it, or you could read about it with that. It's a really great function there. And
is this at the Prado?
Yeah, I don't know. I linked to it through there.
Okay.
I'll here, I'm just gonna put this in here. I'll put
thanks for doing that. I want to,
because it is
I think I accessed this one at the Prado.
Yeah, I think that's where I started.
Excellent. Thanks.
I think some Dutch scholars that were responsible for it. Well, I don't know why there's no dudes that care about Bosch, but ladies, appreciate it. Appreciate you ladies coming out. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. All right, well, anyone.